All right, well, we will get this show on the road. Good morning, everybody. This is Jomo Stewart and Mr. Roger Burgraff. We're here in the FEDC boardroom for this morning's Energy for All Alaska Task Force meeting. It is Tuesday, October the 19th, just after 8 a.m. And with us, we have representatives of our local electric cooperative, Golden Valley Electric Association. We have Mr. McArthur, as well as Mr. Heckman, and of course, Ms. Bailey, here to give us a presentation and update regarding electric vehicles and our capacity to support them. So without further ado, if I may go ahead and hand it over, the floor is yours, gentlemen and lady.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Good morning again. My name is Evan McArthur. I'm the Energy Efficiency Engineer, and Daniel Heckman, who will be speaking also, is our Regulatory Analyst. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about electric vehicles. I have a little overview slide here. First, we're going to talk about the future of electric vehicles in Golden Valley and how we see them being implemented into our system, broken down into 3 different phases. And then we're going to talk about what we're actually doing right now, our current efforts, and they all kind of fit into the first phase still. There's 4 areas we will talk about. So why don't we just jump right in here? The future of GVEA's involvement with electric vehicles. So the future of EV, just in general, we see the electric vehicle market is predicted to overtake the internal combustion engine in sales by 2035. And so we see that this is something that's going to, happen whether or not we want to be in front of it and, be ahead of it and, embrace it, or we could just, wait till EVs are here and then do something. But it makes more sense to, if this is already going to happen, to, be ahead of it, because there's a lot of change that will happen to our electric infrastructure, just with the increase of, electric consumption. We have lots of home charging. We'll have new DC fast charging stations. And we'll have lots of new service installations just for all of the different chargers that will be put in. In addition, there's a common question that I get asked about electric vehicles, because they're one of the main reasons people will buy EVs is because they're conscious of the emissions that that gas and diesel cars put out. And one of the questions is that if we generate electricity with coal or diesel from Golden Valley, isn't it all just the same anyways? Actually, if you have an EV, or if you have a gasoline-powered car right now that's 60 miles per gallon or below, you're better off getting an electric vehicle and allowing Golden Valley to make the power for you. Here's a cool graphic that shows that. There was a study done that went around the states and found what the equivalent miles per gallon gasoline car would be, where the emissions would be equivalent to an electric vehicle. And so in Alaska, you can see that Anchorage and Fairbanks have about 60 miles per gallon. The rest of the state's actually 115 miles per gallon. And so unless you're driving a super fancy, very efficient car, chances are electric vehicles are going to be better for emissions. And also, this is something that is continuing to improve. That number is continuing to get larger. In the last 10 years, it has gone up crazy amount. The number, the blue, the best here, the 51 miles per gallon or above, that's about 80%, 90% of the US. And 10 years ago, it was only 30%. So we see that number continuing to grow as battery technologies get better. So let's start with how we see electric vehicles going forward. So phase 1 of the 3 phases is just removing barriers. This is a new technology, and there are a lot of just natural barriers to growth of electric vehicles because our system is not built around them. First of all, and that's something that my colleague Daniel Heckman will speak about, is this EV fast charging, DC fast charging specific rate. And I'll let him speak more about that. One of the other things we can do to remove barriers is to just provide information to our members. This is a new technology, and there are lots of questions about where the location of the charging stations will be, just updates on general EV topics, what new cars are out there, how do they charge, what's the size of the battery in there, how do they do in the cold. There's a lot of questions about these cars. And in addition to that, we can host electric vehicle events that introduce members, owners, vendors, and the infrastructure just to help people, get familiar with it. One of the things also is to host a few low-cost public chargers, just to allow our members to interact with the charging technology, just to get familiar with it and to learn how it works. And the last thing, one of the things we're currently working on is this the settlement funds from the AEA Volkswagen. And this is something we see as another barrier of transportation. Currently, electric vehicle owners aren't able to drive long distances because there aren't the equivalent of gas station to EVs, so fast chargers along the highway. And so they've been stuck, or there's a barrier that they can only drive in the city that they're in. And so if we're able to expand that and put fast charging along the major highways, then it removes that barrier and allows people to drive the same as they would if they had a gasoline or a diesel car. So that's phase one, just kind of removing barriers, trying to make it easier for people to own an EV. The second phase would be to incentivize upgrades. And this would be installing more public fast charging along the major highways. We're here in Fairbanks. Golden Valley serves all the way down to Cantwell on one end and Delta on the other. And currently there's a lot of installations going from that AEA settlement on the Parks Highway. And so we're also looking at the Alaska Highway. One of the things we can incentivize is level 2 chargers and renting those out to members. We could also electrify the fleet, demonstrating the effectiveness of EVs. We could offer rebates for purchasing electric vehicles or on-bill financing to help with costs. These are not things that Golden Valley is committed to doing. These are things that we're looking into and things that other utilities outside of Alaska have been doing. And so as we continue to learn what our members need, we will adapt and we will evolve our plan to fit what our members need most. But until then, we're considering everything just to keep our options open, and that way we're ready when something that makes sense works. The final phase, and this is kind of an exciting, futuristic kind of fun phase, is phase 3 of grid load management. And so if you picture lots of people owning electric vehicles, and they all go to work and they park in the parking lot and they're hooked up to their chargers, what we have in essence is a large battery that is spread out over all of our system. And if people wanted to opt in, there's some cool things we could do to utilize their, basically battery energy storage system. One of the things is to shave the peak during the peak load. Our peak load is usually at like 5 p.m. when people are going home. So if people drive home and plug their EV in at home, and we've got their battery ready to go. We could also offer reduced rates for off-peak charging if we want to incentivize people charging on the troughs, not the peaks. That way we could help smooth our usage profile. This is just stuff that, again, we're looking into. We would need enough people to own electric vehicles for this kind of stuff to make sense. And so only until then will we consider any of this, but it is an interesting option for the future.
So
go for it.
So if I had questions regarding vehicles themselves and how that charging operates, and you mentioned difference between a certain charge and a level 2, would this be the time to ask those questions, or would we wait until later? Is there a deeper dive later?
There is some more discussion about the chargers, and then we could do questions at the end, unless it would make more sense to do questions about what I just covered. I'm game for whatever.
Okay. Well, are there any questions about what just got covered? Okay, I don't see anyone throwing their chat in the chat box or pulling themselves off mute. So, okay, why don't we just go ahead and proceed?
Cool. I'll establish, I guess, a little bit about the different chargers, just briefly. There's three levels in electric vehicle charging, and this is pretty standard across the nation. There's level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 1 charging is you plug your car into a 120-volt AC outlet at home, and you've got a little adapter that trickle charges your batteries. It takes like 8 hours to charge your car. That's level 1 charging, and that's about 85% of charging for electric vehicles is at home using a level 1 or a level 2. Actually, level 2 is up to like 40 kilowatts, and these are like your kind of mid-range chargers. This is something you'd see maybe in a parking lot or outside an apartment building where people are going to be parked for a fair amount of time. But they may be, leaving and going places. So if you're going to a mall, you'd plug into a level 2, and then your car you'd be fully charged after about 4 hours, but you'd get some charge, over 2 hours. Let's say you're in the mall for 2 hours, and then you would get 50% of charge. And if your battery wasn't completely drained, then that would top you off. Then level 3 is where it transitions to what's called DC fast charging. And so all the chargers before use AC, but on your car to charge your battery, it needs DC electricity. And so it has to convert it on the car. And so to get faster charging, if you just put DC into the car, then it doesn't have to convert it. And then it just charges the batteries right away. And so at 50 kilowatts and higher, I guess to maybe 150, 200. Those are called level 3 chargers or DC fast charging. And those are the ones that we're installing right now. And I'll be talking about that here soon. So that's just kind of a brief overview of the levels. I should have mentioned that earlier just to kind of set that up. But,
no, it's fine. So how long would that DC charger take?
So the DC fast charger, if you had a standard car that was about 70 kilowatt hour battery, it would take about an hour to go from 0 to full. But most people don't show up to the station completely empty, and so they could top off in like 20-30 minutes. And that's the current fastest that people are installing right now. There are much larger chargers, but the cars that are being manufactured can't handle the faster charging yet. And so once they can, it makes more sense to install the larger chargers. But currently, the fastest typically most cars can charge at is the 50 kilowatts.
Okay. Oh, I'm really glad I asked, because I did wonder, again, we have lots of plug-in stations around town, obviously, how useful they might be.
Oh, the head bolt heaters for the gasoline cars that you're thinking of? Yeah. It depends on the system. I think people who have them out there for head bolt heating and then an EV comes in, just plugs in, might use a bit more power than they're expecting. So it would kind of be on the owner and their system to just make sure it can handle the load before they say that it's okay for EV charging. So I would, if I owned an EV and I was going to plug into a head bolt, I'd be sure to ask the owner first, just because sometimes if there's enough people plugged in, it wasn't originally designed for that, right? It was designed for smaller loads to heat cars. But in some instances, it's fine, and people are okay with that, and they might even dedicate an outlet for it. In some instances, they may not be. So it just depends on how it was installed.
I always felt like we would have a kind of a behavioral jump on transition to electric vehicles, just because we are habituated up here to plugging in vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We're already ready to plug in our cars. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. As always, everybody, if you do have any questions, again, please know that you can unmute yourself, or you may lodge them in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and read them. All right, thank you very much, Mr. McArthur.
Cool. Well, if there aren't any other questions, then we can go forward with what we're currently working on. And so again, all of this is in phase 1. We're just working on removing barriers at this point. So my colleague, Mr. Heckman, will discuss this specific rate for DCFC.
Thanks, Evan, and good morning, everyone. So before I dive deeper into the DCFC rate, as Evan kind of alluded to earlier, this would be only applicable to level 3 chargers, not level 1 and not level 2. So I just kind of wanted to set the stage for that before I did a deeper dive. But as Evan alluded to earlier in his comments, right now the focus for Golden Valley and really a majority of the utilities and the railbelt utilities is to remove these barriers that exist in our rate structures and in the Alaska regulations on the electric vehicle market in Alaska. Both Golden Valley and the railbelt utilities heard extensively from participants in the market as well as other stakeholders saying that the utility rates that we currently have in place and the Alaska regulations on the books are an impediment to the development of an electric vehicle, I would say, charging infrastructure across the rail belt. So in response to those comments received, the railbelt utilities, and just to make sure everyone understands what I mean by that, we have Chugach Electric Association down in Anchorage that serves both the city and the greater Bowl area. MEA Matanuska Electric serves the Matanuska-Susitna Borough area up to just south of Cantwell. Homer Electric serves down kind of past the southern tip of the Anchorage outskirts all the way down to the Homer area. And then although they are not truly a generation utility, the city of Seward does count as a railbelt utility for purposes of this and other railbelt issues. So we all submitted a letter to the Regulatory Commission of Alaska back in May of this year. And as part of that letter, we propose a blended rate methodology. And basically what this rate is going to do is that it's going to take the applicable demand charge and energy charges for all the railbelt utilities and basically combine them into kind of a blended rate and assign a load factor that would be specific to that utility dependent on location. Golden Valley's is relatively low compared to other utilities, and also our demand charge threshold is higher than others. So ours is we're pretty in a good position right now, but we wanted to make sure that we had a rate in place that would be applicable to all the railbelt utilities regardless of location. And really what the policy drivers behind this rate, and I'm not going to go into any particular order, some of them have been talked about, is that we want something that works for the marketplace. We believe that does that. It would allow for the development of the charging corridor that's been in discussions off and on for the past few years. And it would also remove the barriers to the development of this level 3 charging infrastructure that we currently see. While we are, I would say, while we are proponents of this market, while we're trying to develop it, we are also cognizant of some of the regulatory barriers that exist that prohibit us from going all out and just introducing something that goes completely outside of regulations and rate making principles. So we want to propose this on an inception basis. And what I mean by that is that this rate that would be adopted by the RCA would be in place for about 10 years. And in that time period, a utility could choose to, as part of a general rate case filing, make these rates permanent as part of their rate structures, or they can maybe discontinue the rate depending on the usage and depending on how much interest there is. So this 10-year time period will kind of give the utilities more information to base that decision as time goes on. But then we're also clear that by putting this rate in and by making it applicable to level 3 chargers, that these entities, these individuals are paying for the fair share of costs that the utility is incurring to them, and that those costs aren't being carried by residential members who may not own electric vehicles or other rate classes. And that's what I mean by no undue discrimination in rate making, is that, we believe that this rate allows us to appropriately allocate the cost that the utility is incurring for the DCFC infrastructure to those who will actually use it. So we have put that in front of the RCA. And if you have been following anything that's been going at the RCA lately, they are incredibly busy. They have a lot on their plate. So they have suspended this proposal into a docket. And that's pretty typical. We expected that would happen. And basically what that does, it allows them to look at our proposal a little bit more deeper, and then to basically give themselves some breathing space to either approve it, modify it, deny it, which is all something that they can do. But as part of our request, we want to, this was at their urging, we not only want them to adopt this methodology, but we want them to do a couple of other things unique to EVs. The first is that we want the RCA to exempt these charging stations from economic regulation, because these charging stations are could be deemed sellers of electric power. They could be subject to the same regulations that govern Golden Valley, and it is not fair to put that level of regulation and burden on these charging stations. So we're asking the RCA to exempt them from economic regulation as a public utility. We're also asking the RCA to look at the tariffs that are in place for all of the railboat utilities and other electric utilities, and state that these charger stations that are taking power from Golden Valley, or I'm sorry, or if the member is or who owns a charging station is selling power, that's not deemed a resale of electricity. Currently, there is a prohibition in our tariff that does not allow members to essentially take the power that we sell them and then resell them to other members, kind of like it's a pass through with a markup. The members are earning a profit. That's a prohibition that's in our tariff, and we're asking the RCA to basically exempt the EV charging stations from that prohibition. So it's definitely an out of the box, really out there regulatory solution. If you know anything about regulatory affairs, it's a very archaic set of rules that govern the utilities. So we're very pleased to see how the engineers and regulatory people at the railboat utilities, as well as the stakeholders, came together to really advocate for a solution that we believe works and is appropriate with rate making principles. We've asked the RCA to issue an order as soon as possible so we can get things rolling, both for the chargers and for the utilities. But under their statutory timeframe, they're not required to issue one until December of this year. And as I alluded to earlier, I do not believe that they will issue one before that time period, just given everything that's on their plate. I've been wrong before, but I am not optimistic at this stage that we'll see anything until December. But from a regulatory perspective, that's kind of where things are at on current efforts. And I mean, at this stage, I would entertain any questions that you guys have on that before I transition back to Evan here.
Please, I would open up the floor. Do we have any questions? I know I do. Don't look at me like that, Dotson. Somebody's got to carry this show. The first two, the privately owned EV DC charging stations and the electric utilities revised tariff rates for resale, those seem to partially to address things like we have convenience stores right now that sell gasoline
Yes.
or diesel. So is that partially meant to address that situation where it wouldn't be just a direct sale from, say, GVEA, MEA, with those third parties, like now with filling stations?
I would say comparable, yes, but not quite, because the power that's taken from us to I would say to basically power those filling stations and everything. It's not like they're taking that electricity and then selling it to the people who are at the filling stations. But I hope I'm answering your question here. But that's the principle is the same, is that pretend that the filling stations are instead filled with electricity. You pull up, you plug it in, and the electricity that those entities are drawing from Golden Valley, they just completely flow it through to the users at a markup price. And under the current regime for the filling station, that is allowed because that is not a direct pass through of power. We're not taking the power from the filling station, we're taking gasoline. But under the tariff, under current regulations, if you are basically going up there and you're taking their electricity and they're charging a markup for, I would say, for more residential members, that is a prohibition. For more industrial, large commercial members, I think it's more of a, I would say it's an exception to the norm, but that's kind of what that prohibition is addressing. I hope that answered your question.
A bit, as you noted, regulation is quite complex.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for taking that on for the rest of us.
You're
Okay,
right.
do we have
You're
any further
welcome.
questions? Jim? Okay. All right. As always, again, if something comes to mind, please do feel free to chime in. Thanks, Mr. Heckman.
Thank you. All right, Evan, back to you, sir.
Thanks. Well, that was the first area that we're currently working in. The second area that we're also working in is working with these Volkswagen settlement funds. They're being distributed through the Alaska Energy Authority. Specifically, well, a little background, Volkswagen falsified emissions ratings, and because of that, they had to pay a settlement that includes part of the payment to Alaska for EV infrastructure. So that's where the money came from. So the AEA sent out an RFA, and lots of people in the state applied, and if they met criteria for their station, they would receive funding to help install an electric vehicle charging station. And multiple people within the Golden Valley service area applied, and some of the sites were in Healy and Fairbanks, and currently they're working on their installations. We assisted from the utility side in what their site could realistically hold, what cost it would take to upgrade the site, upgrade the power, and that kind of stuff. And I know we have also a site, I think, in Cantwell that's going into. So anyways, this is another area that we've been helping some of the applicants in this. The third area is another charger install in Cantwell. This was actually the first one. It was the northernmost charger when it went in. And so a little background, Golden Valley Electric awarded a grant to Recharge Alaska, and they installed this DCFC. So when I say DCFC, it stands for DC Fast Charger, also level 3. They installed this near Cantwell. It's at mile 214.5. And they had a successful installation in August. They worked very hard to get something in despite COVID and the shipping, and we're very proud of that. And in August, they also saw 35 charging sessions, which was significantly higher than we had intended or expected for that site. So that was cool. Unfortunately, since then, it's out of service. So don't read this and then go see it. They had to send it back to the manufacturer for repair, but it should be coming back here shortly. We're also, the final area that we're working on here is this Golden Valley campus EV project. And we're installing 2 DCFCs here in the parking lot just near our member service building off Illinois Street. And the purpose of this project is the same as what I had said at the beginning in phase one. We're trying to remove the barriers. There are currently no fast charging stations in Fairbanks, and this would be the first and the northernmost in Alaska. So the first thing we want to do, and as Golden Valley, we are member owned, we operate to our members' needs. And there are members who own EVs, and so we want to provide a service to our members. We also want to demonstrate our commitment to the green initiatives. This is something that we want to get in front of. We are excited to be a part of this. We're also excited to gain experience with the new technology. There's a lot that goes into installing an electric vehicle charging station that you wouldn't just think of offhand. You'd think you just set it there and plug it in. But it was good for us to do this. So now we have the experience and the knowledge to assist other members and other commercial entities in our service area with their installations too. And being the only charger in Fairbanks, it adds a link to the charging corridor. And so from Anchorage to Fairbanks and then Fairbanks back down to Delta, we have this corridor where a lot of people drive. And so this will add a link between those two highways and allow people to come in and charge on their road trip without too much of a wait. The chargers themselves that we're installing, the physical installation started last week and it's continuing this week. These are the chargers that are going in. They're Flow chargers. They're the Flow Smart DC chargers, if you want to look them up. They have two plugs. One is a CHAdeMO and the other one is a CCS1. These are the two most common plugs used by electric vehicles. They cover pretty much all of them, other than Tesla. Tesla has their own charging, but they also sell an adapter that is used with a CCS1. And currently we don't have one, we're not providing that, but we're also looking into that too. But if Tesla owners have an adapter, they are free to use the CCS1 plug with the adapter there. If you have the largest EV possible and you ran it all the way down to zero, the longest it would ever take for you to get a full charge is an hour and a half. Typically though, most EV users won't be here for that long. They will have some charge and it will be somewhere in the 30 to 40 minutes for the longer charging and then 20 minutes for a top off. And the payment, there is no credit card swipe machine, but it's all handled through Flow, and they have their own account system where there's a number on the machine you can call and pay with a card over the phone. You can also make an account with Flow and get an application on your phone, and then you can pay through your phone through the application. You can also make an account with Flow and order an RFID card, and then from there, that's just linked to your card, and then when you show up, you just tap your RFID, and then you're good to go. And that sounds really nice for those really cold winter days when you don't want to be out longer than you have to be. So these are going in at Golden Valley right there in front. If you drive by Illinois, you'll see them right now. They're working on the installation. So that should be all of the four areas that we're currently working on EV chargers. I want to thank you for the time to give this presentation and allow some time for questions or comments.
Okay, Mr. Dodson.
I've been with a car pulled up to your charger and charged for an hour and a half, I guess taking maximum amount of electricity. What would the charge be about?
What would the cost be to
Yes.
the user?
Yes.
Roughly $12. It could be maybe 15, I guess, for a larger vehicle, but it's substantially cheaper than gasoline.
Substantially. All right, well, we'll open up the floor to questions. And I can't believe we wouldn't have any. Anyone take the plunge?
Jomo, this is Jim Schwarber. I have a question.
Please.
I've been looking at possibly purchasing a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid here in Fairbanks, and Toyota has a couple models available now that have limited range, 20 to 40 miles, but I was curious if these chargers interface well with the plug-in hybrid option for electric vehicles.
Thank you. That's a good question. That isn't something that we have considered with this charger. Usually the batteries on those EVs are much smaller, and so they don't need the fast charger. But if you can plug into a CCS1 or a CHAdeMO plug, if there's an adapter for the hybrid, then I'm sure there is some interface for you to be able to use it. But I would do some research on that first, and I can write that down and look into it also, just to see. Do you know what specific car it is that you're getting from Tesla, or not Tesla, from Toyota?
Well, I haven't ordered one, but there's a 2021, 2022 Toyota Prius Prime and also a RAV4 Prime. The first gets 20 miles per charge, the other one gets 40 miles per charge. So again, it's just a short one, but for 90% of the driving I do in Fairbanks, I could get by without having to buy gas with one of those.
Yeah, I'll look into those. I'm not sure about the hybrids.
I appreciate it.
Installation is specifically for the EVs, but yeah, of course.
Okay, Mr. Music.
Yes, I have a question. Thanks so far for the presentation. I'm really excited to see that you're getting ahead of the curve here on this. I'm just wondering what your crystal ball tells you when most people will be driving EVs, and how are we going to power them? Are we going to continue to burn coal, or do you see renewables helping clean up the air?
Good question. It's hard to know when. I mean, there's a lot of predictions out there, and people who will talk about when they expect EVs to overtake, on the road and not just in the sales. And what I've seen, I think one of the numbers are thrown around is like 2050. But of course, as soon as we get closer to that date, it'll be more accurate. In terms of the power generated, Golden Valley, one of their missions is to provide low cost and reliable power to our members. Of course, we're also looking into renewables and finding ways to do that. But in Fairbanks, it seems like, I don't know. I don't want to comment too much on this. This isn't really the presentation, but we're definitely looking into it. I'll say that. We're looking into renewables and trying to find ways to implement them in the system. And trying to maximize, or limit the amount of, maximize the renewables, limit the amount of emissions. But on that one slide that I showed earlier, even if Golden Valley wasn't to change anything about what we do right now, and everyone was to buy an EV, chances are, I could say most of the people who own cars in Fairbanks are below that 60 miles per gallon efficiency. And so even if Golden Valley didn't do anything and everyone bought an EV, we would see a reduction in emissions in Fairbanks. Does that help?
Sorry, Mike.
Back to my question. I'm not sure I heard an estimated date when we might see that transition.
Oh, yeah. I said at the beginning, I was pretty quick. I think one of the studies I saw was 2050. But of course, that's subject to change as we get more information.
Thank you.
Of course.
Kind of as a counterpoint question, what is the current market for EV charging? Or do we have some kind of estimate for that? I mean, again, we are putting in infrastructure, and we're going to be putting in substantial amounts of infrastructure. What kind of market are we serving?
Yes. So part of the reason why we're installing a charger is to get information. The specific rate for EV charging is an inception rate. It's something that we're looking into this, trying to get as much data as we can. The charger that we had a grant for with Recharge in Cantwell, a big part of that installation was we had access to the charging sessions so we could understand the market. So if we knew how many people are charging in Cantwell and driving up and down the parks, and how long they're charging and what energy they're using and how many different vehicles are coming, then we'd have a better idea of how this market's growing in Alaska specifically. And with the charger that we'll have in Fairbanks, we'll be able to know, as people use it, and if the usage grows, we'll be able to know what the market is for that. Currently, it's kind of hard to estimate because most people just charge at home. And so that's part of being able to, have these charging stations out there, is just to, gather the data to make, informed decisions on the infrastructure. And if the charger's installed and we see, pretty low usage for a while, then, we respond to our members. If our members need more charging, then we'll look into helping with that. And if they don't, then we'll be fine with just what we put in.
Okay. We did get a little note in the chat box that there are 1,225 EVs registered in the state and about 450 on the rail belt.
Yeah, I think, is it the Electric Vehicle Working Group? There is a group that keeps track of that, and that's also a good resource. Thanks for that.
Okay, thanks. So we do have another couple of questions in the chat box. Can an EV vehicle be running while you charge it? And this is a solid Fairbanks winter question. Can I keep the heat on? I like filling up my car.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. That's a good question, something to look into. I'll write that down.
The follow-on question is, what opportunities are there for partnering with retail locations where people can shop, dine, entertain while they wait for the charge? And perhaps things like borough facilities like libraries.
Yeah, thanks for that question. We're looking into that right now. If commercial entities are interested in stuff like that, or public, like the library or something like that, those would probably be the places where level 2 chargers would make the most sense, just because people are there for longer than just 20 minutes. And yeah, that's something we're looking into. That would be kind of the next step. That's kind of phase 2, incentivizing those upgrades. Yeah, we would look into partnering with people to put those in and help with supplying the power there.
So you're already in some kind of partnership there in Cantwell. I mean, you're discussing it in a way that it is not GVEA owned.
Yes. Would you like me to expand on that?
If you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so it was of interest to Golden Valley because the grant was, we just helped purchase the materials. We just helped purchase the charger. And then Recharge Alaska, which is an organization that is interested in EV charging in the whole state, they manage it. And so if are there any issues with the charger at the station, they manage the installation process. And it was actually very beneficial for both Recharge and for Golden Valley. Recharge was able to get some money to help with their installation that they already were planning on doing. And Golden Valley would get they would be able to help with this installation at a pretty low cost compared to installing it all ourselves. And then we get all of the data too. They send us data pretty regularly of the charging and the charging sessions. And so, yes, Golden Valley is in a partnership with them. I wouldn't say we owned it, but we're invested in it. Would be a good word.
Well, it's good because it sounds like, again, at this moment, by the close of year, you'll be testing a pair of systems. Again, one that's directly GVEA owned and managed, but also again under a partnering relationship to see how that would work as well.
Yes.
All
exactly.
useful data going before the RCA. Mr. Burgraff, please.
Yeah.
And then you, Mr. Music.
How much would it cost to go ahead and install a recharging unit at your home? I think most people that drive electric vehicles, at least within the range of the vehicle, would want to be able to charge their vehicle or do it every evening after being in town. Has anybody figured out what it would cost? If you get an electric vehicle, you'll want to be able to have something where you could charge it at home. So.
So the level
Has
2.
anybody done any estimate on what the cost of that would be? And of course, that would be charged directly. I would think that it'd go on your electric bill.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So if you're charging at home, you'll be either in the level 1 or level 2 charging. Most people, when they charge at home, just use level 1 because they'll plug in the evening and go to sleep, and then they'll have, you know, an 8-hour chunk where the car's sitting charging and they don't need the faster charging. And so for level 1, most manufacturers have a charger that will just let you plug in. It'll either come with the car or it'll be a very small amount to pay for it. If you wanted the faster charger, if you want a level 2, they're anywhere from like $200 to $1,000 to install. And they also use typically 240 volts. So you'll need a double breaker on your system at home. And so if you want to install either of those, I mean, the level 1 doesn't require any, you know, change to your electric system. You just plug that in and it you know, trickle charges your battery. And the level 2 would require a little bit more, but it's still something you could probably do at home if you're handy, or you could hire an electrician to do for you.
Or it might be the kind of thing if you had a fleet or we're doing something where driving was your business, you know, where you were going to drain it down more over the course of a day.
Yeah, if you had a fleet, there's a whole different section of charging just for fleet vehicles. And those can be some of the very large chargers. There's some technology going on with buses and some really interesting charging methods where they don't really plug them in, they just park underneath, and then there's a charging port on top of the bus. And those can get up anywhere in like 400 kilowatts. You know, if you were to change, you know, a bus in a well-populated city and they need to park and charge every so often, you know, during the day, they'd want to be, you know, charging pretty quickly and getting back out on the road. If you were just charging, you know, like smaller residential cars, you could probably get away with level 2 charging because their range at full, you know, is somewhere in the 150 mile range. And so if you're driving around town, you probably aren't gonna drive 150 miles just in Fairbanks. That'd be a lot of driving.
Well, this is all very interesting. Thank you so much. Again, the floor is open for questions. I see you're off mute, Mr. Music.
Yes, I have an observation. If I were driving from here to Anchorage, I'd be a little upset when I got to Cantwell and found out they were out of service. And that makes me realize how important it is to have redundancy here in terms of all forms of energy. And so it seems like these should be installed in pairs, so you always have one that's going to work, let's say. One could be down for maintenance or something like that. And also, I'm wondering what sort of performance the electric school bus, I think it was down either in Tok or Delta, how's that working out?
Yeah, thanks. So to answer the first part of your question, yes, that is something that the redundancy of charging stations is something that has been documented well over, you know, the installation. It's something that, you know, people like. The one charger in Cantwell, it's right next to a business that also the very friendly guy that'll help you charge your vehicle. And so in addition to that, there's also a website. There are a few websites that keep track of the chargers, where they are at and whether they're available or not. So if you own an EV, it's useful to check those out before you go on your drive, just so you can plan your stops. There are additional chargers going in Healy and another one in Cantwell proper. And so there will be redundancy, not necessarily at the site itself, but in terms of additional sites to go to. It'd be the same as, you know, one gas station, let's say their whole network's down, so you can't pay at all there. But, you know, maybe there's another gas station in the same city. So redundancy in the specific site and redundancy in terms of, you know, multiple charging businesses in the same area is something that is useful. I think for now we might see a few single chargers in places just because this is new, and they are not cheap chargers. It's definitely an investment, and so for someone to just purchase one and then start a business selling energy to EVs, they might start out with just the one and then grow from there. Can you remind me what your second point was?
Yeah, I was wondering how the the electric school bus was doing.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I don't have any specifics, but I've heard it's been doing well. It'd be something interesting to definitely look into, and something we could apply maybe in Fairbanks.
So a couple of notes in the chat box. Mr. McGregor is just a font of information, good information today. So he says that AEA funded sites require at least one level 2 charging station to be co-located with their DCFCs.
Yes, that is correct.
And then he says there's also there's a level 2 site in Cantwell.
Oh, cool.
Well, we're going to have a lot to learn. I guess the big outstanding question, you mentioned performance, particularly battery performance in our climatic conditions. But again, some of this is to try to glean that information as well. Yes.
Yeah, it is. I've heard from just kind of anecdotally from some members that when it gets really cold in Fairbanks when they charge, part of the energy at the charging station actually goes to just warming the battery so they're ready to charge. And so the time that it takes to charge in the coldest months of the winter might be a little bit longer. And that's something we're also looking at, seeing if that's true or how much of a difference it makes. I know that there's a lot of research going into new battery technologies that are more resilient to changes in temperature. And as those come out, I'm sure people in Fairbanks will be more confident to switch to those too, because there's other places across the world that are testing vehicles in these extreme conditions, trying to make them rugged and hardy and not something that you would feel like is a liability having to own in a cold climate location. So yeah, definitely it's something we're looking into and trying to gather data on.
I'll just add in real quickly, if I may. We're actually talking to companies who we routinely come and test in Fairbanks and who are planning to come and test this winter, and the ability to have that public DC fast charger in Fairbanks is a real benefit to them. So I anticipate that we'll see expanded cold weather testing as a result.
Music to our ears. That's one of our projects. I may have to circle around with you though to see what data we might be able to glean from you for reporting to the borough. Again, regarding who comes and tests, or actually less about who comes and tests, but just that how many instances, I guess, would be a better way of putting it. But thank you. Awesome. I would expect that over time, again, there's going to be some merging here between rehabituation and just technology improvement. They'll be working to make the batteries and the systems so that they charge faster, because that comes more in line with how we're used to doing things. Most of us do not sit at a gas station for 20 minutes. You're in and out within 5. And that's kind of how people are habituated. But yeah, and then some rehabituation. You'll get used to doing a little bit better planning regarding, quote unquote, the filling of your vehicle, i.e., do it more at home, or plan for longer stops, being able to charge when you're doing a longer stop, as someone noted, like say having dinner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the unique thing with EVs is that a gasoline engine you can't fill up at home, but an EV you can. And so that's one of the major benefits of owning one is you can just charge at home and you don't have to fight for the spaces at the gas station.
Or me, forget to fill on the way to work and then white knuckle it.
That too.
All right. Well, we are nearing the top of the hour. I would go ahead and open it up for any final questions. Nothing from you, Jim? I'm sure you'll be the first guy I know who has an electric vehicle, Mr. Tech Savvy.
Well, I was going to add that during this, I did want to add that during the summer, I have a solar array on my roof that produces excess electricity that I'd be able to apply to my electric vehicle charging at home. So I'd be totally avoiding the carbon emissions for transportation for most of my local driving. And I think that's a plus for our community and our world. So thank you.
Good way.
Good call. All right, is there anything further? All right, well, I guess that's it. GVEA, Team GVEA, Mr. Heckman, Mr. McArthur, thank you so much, Miss Bailey. All right. Well, I tell you, let's see. So would you be able to send this presentation in case anybody wants a copy?
Yes, I could do that. I can not over 1 second. I'm just writing it down.
Answers to the questions.
Second.
And his answers.
Oh, and of course, an answers to the questions. Okay, otherwise I can get you all in, if anyone has any questions, I'm sure we could all get you all in direct contact. All right, well, thanks a million, everybody. Speaking of white knuckling, I don't have anything specific lined up for next week, but I'll be circling around. I'm trying to line up a nice mining presentation for us. I just haven't gotten confirmation yet. If anyone didn't have the chance to go, just a note that the redistricting board again was in town yesterday. I did go to see the maps and also to hear some of the Q&A or the public testimony. Please know that if you do have comments regarding those draft redistricting maps, you can always go to their website and provide it in written form. They also have they have all the maps. Then they also have a neat function that can allow you to basically try to draw your own redistricting map. So if you really want to take on a challenge, it's interesting, see if you can do a better job on those districts. But in any case, everybody, again, thank you, Team GVEA. Really appreciate the presentation. It's really neat to see all the work you're doing on this item. And so please do keep it up. I'm sure you will. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week, and I will be contacting you to let you know what our show is for next week. All right, see you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.